Chapter 11. Floating half a meter above the slip point's deck and at nearly 1 meter per second, Dickerson felt calm. He continued checking his rear cam, looking for any pine cones or starfish that might have followed them into the shaft, but so far, nothing. The fact they were floating meant he could arch his back, rest his stressed muscles and joints, and relax. A little. The constant crouch walking through Mira's haunted corridors had taken their toll on his body. He'd little doubt Mira and Carb were in as bad a shape as himself. Although she'd never admit it, he imagined Carb was in more pain than anyone else. While Elliot's body weighed next to nothing in ZG, pulling his mass along had to be affecting her. Eventually, he'd have to force her to give up the wounded Marine so he could carry him. She wouldn't give up that duty willingly. Too damned hard-headed. The headache that had simmered inside his skull for the last half hour was fading a bit. Either the bio-nannies had found enough reserves to help him out, or just the act of floating, rather than walking, was helping him regain his strength. But the dull throb in his shoulder had drained away any relief. He'd really fucked himself up now. He wasn't sure how much pressure he could put on his wounded arm before the rotator cuff simply froze, leaving him a single limb to protect both himself and his squad. "Least I know how to fire my weapon one-handed," he thought. 10 meters, Mira said over the squad channel. "Copy," he said, Carb echoing him a second later. They'd reached their first junction in no time. Abandoning crouch walking also provided the advantage of speed, which was a good thing, because Dickerson couldn't wait to get the fuck off this wreck. Dickerson ticked off the seconds, watching as the junction came into view. This far on Mira's starboard side meant the junction could only go one way, to port. Mira's suit thrusters puffed, and she slowed. Carb followed suit, as did he. Once they were all stationary, Mira pulled herself to the deck using her right glove. She was less than half a meter from the junction's blind corner. Depending on what she saw down the egress shaft, they might have to jet in a hurry. "Not like that will be far," he thought. They were all nearly out of fuel for their thrusters. Another hard burn, and they'd be empty, unable to even use maneuvering jets to change their attitude. They needed to find some way to recharge their suits, and soon. Mira held up a fist and crouch-walked against the wall. She slowly peered around the corner, her helmet lights focused to penetrate the gloom. Dickerson held his breath, his mind filling with the image of an impossibly black arm pulling her into the adjoining shaft.
"Shit," she said over the squad channel. "We've got some serious debris in here."
Dickerson sighed. "How bad?"
"Bad,"
the corporal said.
"How's your injured arm?"
"Still bad, but I think I can lift some mass with it."
"Good. Get up here, Dickerson."
Carb snorted over the mic.
"Am I too girly for that job?" "No,"
Mira said without turning around.
"You're the only one of us without broken ribs and with 2 good arms. Meaning you can carry Elliot and aim at the same time. That's what I need you to do." "Aye, boss," Carb
said in a somewhat depressed voice. Dickerson grinned. His squad mate was tired of carrying Elliot, but Mira was right. They needed her to be their anchor if something went wrong. And what could possibly go wrong? He mag-walked past Carb to join Mira. She stood in the center of the adjoining shaft, her rifle pointed down the hall. Dickerson saw what she did and exhaled in a long stream of breath. She hadn't been kidding about debris. The shaft had nearly collapsed just a few meters from the junction. Something had smashed the metal with enough force to not only perforate the slip point tunnel, but fracture part of the wall. As a result, broken pipes, wire, and other infrastructure had ultimately filled the once empty space. If the two of them worked together, they might be able to clear it in 10 minutes. Maybe. That was a long time, though. "Corporal," he said, "maybe we should go a little further down to the next junction?" She was silent for a moment. He imagined her going over the schematics, looking for the next egress point and determining risk.
"And if that next egress point is as bad as this one, or worse?"
He shrugged. "Then we come back here," he said. "If we float, it shouldn't take any time to reach it at all." Mira raised an arm and pointed down the cluttered egress. "There's an emergency station not 5 meters beyond this wreckage. The next egress doesn't have one for nearly 20 meters. Considering what we've come in contact with, that's a long distance." True, Dickerson said. I'm okay either way. Just wanted to bring up an alternative,
As you should.
she said.
Carb, cover our asses. Dickerson and I will try and clear this. Aye, boss.
Carp said.
Just make sure you don't perforate a suit. Not sure how long any of these patches will hold.
Copy that, Dickerson drawled. Corporal, shall we? She maglocked her rifle to her back and began walking forward. He did the same, hoping like hell this wasn't another mistake. Chapter 12. Black's attention was split between helping Dunn with his mission planning, working with Oakes on the new force calculations, including thruster pack placement, monitoring communications channels, keeping track of Talby's position relative to the ship, and watching for any movement on Mira. In short, Black was a busy AI. The communications array picked up a signal from PEO. The observatory AI, Mickey, had sent a priority data package. A big one. Images, video, telemetry calculations, and suggestions were all part of the stream. In a matter of nanoseconds, Black unpacked and analyzed the data. The AI then took a moment to think. Mickey had been watching the incoming KBO, only now, Mickey wasn't convinced it was an actual ball of ice. For one thing, it was glowing. Mickey's instruments were far more powerful than Black's. The telescopes aboard PEO could make out details Black would never be able to discern until the objects were on top of her, and those details were most interesting. A group of still images captured the KBO as a dot and slowly zoomed in on it. With each increase in magnification, the object became more and more detailed. KBOs were often misshapen, their creation the result of impacts with larger bodies, rather than the natural conglomeration of gases via gravity or from gravitational force. Instead, they frequently resembled haphazard blobs, but not this one. The shape seemed to be canted at its front, and it wasn't rotating or tumbling. The KBO was on a direct path and moving like a projectile. While those particular facets already made it unique, the object also appeared to have a thin, raised portion that pointed toward the sun. Mickey had provided no conclusions about what the data meant, choosing instead to let Black draw her own. If she could talk to the trio, she could get some guidance. Maybe. But a message to Trident Station would take 3 hours to get there and 3 more to receive the reply. By that time, they'd have to have Mira far away from her current position to avoid the KBO. But that was another problem. According to Mickey's calculations, the KBO would be in range in less than an hour. Black created a new subroutine to monitor the KBO, reserving 3 cameras on the aft to track the approaching object and warn her if it changed trajectory or velocity. Mickey had also highlighted several smaller shadows in the large KBO's vicinity. The PEO AI hadn't been able to confirm they were more than interference or graphical artifacts, but suggested Black keep a watch on them. Black intended to. She sent Mickey a response, thanking the AI for its timely information and asking it to monitor all KBO activity within a 1 AU vicinity of Mira. The spherical area needed to serve as an early warning system should other objects approach. According to the data gathered by Callimore's squad aboard Mira, it was more than likely that both the incoming KBO and the shadows near it were not made of ice or rock. Instead, they were almost certainly exosolar material. Correction, exosolar life forms. And if they were as large as Black feared, towing Mira would be the least of their problems. Chapter 13. Boring was an understatement. He was on his 5th pass, floating above S&R Black and circling while keeping an eye on the feeds from Private Copenhaver and Private Like. Copenhaver had taken up a firing position just a meter or so away from her squad mate, her flechette rifle held expertly in her hands. Every few seconds, she turned to face a different direction. It made Talmy smile. When you took up sentry duty, you were taught to have your head on a swivel. He just didn't know anyone would take that so literally. Rather than use her camera feeds to watch for incoming hostiles, Copenhaver had taken a much more active approach. Considering the creatures they'd encountered so far, he wasn't sure he'd be content with cam feeds either. Watching through your helmet cam was less disorienting and gave you a better feel for the world around you. Using cam feeds always left a dead spot or two from which a hostile could get the drop on you. And that was the real fear, of course. Getting jumped from behind? Not a worry. But a surprise attack from the right angle could leave you dead in space. Whoever had taught Copenhagen had done a good job. The Marine was damned good. Talby hoped she'd stick around when her tour was up. If there is another tour, he whispered to himself. That was by no means a sure bet. Sure, S&R Black sat atop the spindle, its boring drill screwed into the hull to both secure it and make a tight seal with Mira. But they hadn't tried to fire the engines yet, and they sure as hell didn't know if the deck plates would hold. And if they didn't, well, there was no telling what would happen. Talby tried to push away the thought of the S&R vessel breaking free from Mira, sending shards of metal into orbit around the massive ship, and maybe dragging a deck plate along with it. S&R Black might survive the jolt, but anyone caught outside the ship would be annihilated. Even if the jolt didn't destroy the ship, it could send S&R Black straight into the hull, or flying off into space just far enough to get smashed by Mira. Until they flattened or tumbled completely, that was a real concern. He hadn't said anything to Dunn about it, but he was sure the captain already knew, as did Oakes and Black. In fact, the force calculations and simulations the three of them had run no doubt took that into account, but that didn't mean Talby felt good about it. Every calculation, every simulation, even by an AI, had a high degree of uncertainty when you didn't know all the variables. And out here, with Mira's condition and the creatures she brought back with her, they were at the mercy of unknown variables. Talby activated a microburn to turn the SV-52 when he reached the edge of his square patrol area. He couldn't see the two Marines on the hull since they were directly beneath S&R Black, but he could see the surrounding environment. It was enough for him to at least give them a heads up before those starfish things or a herd of pine cones showed up. Herd? School? Talby shook his head. He'd no idea what to call the damn things. Assuming they ever made it back to Trident Station for a debrief and data offload, he imagined exobiologists would spend decades poring over the information they gathered. Hell, maybe in a decade or two, the brains would know what the hell these things were made from. Unless we bring back a sample. And boy, didn't that scare the shit out of him. It was bad enough to face these things out here, but the idea of bringing them back to populated space, any of them? He shivered. What would happen if the pine cones with their metal-crunching talons or the starfish with their corroding acid found a space station? If they managed to make their way to Titan Station or Enceladus Prime, the outer fringes of humanity would be at great risk. He hoped for Earth's sake the little buggers couldn't survive an entry into the atmosphere. Now that was a terrifying idea. The cradle of humanity, the original gravity well from which humanity evolved, being overrun by exosolar life like some kind of ET plague. Would the pine cones slice and dice unsuited humans? How about the starfish? Would they just fly down and rip people apart or dissolve them with shots of acid? Talby shook his head to clear the thoughts. Distractions. It wasn't the first time his mind had wandered far afield while providing cover. When you didn't have an immediate threat, it was difficult to keep focused. He didn't even have to think about the adjustments to keep on his patrol square. Too many rote exercises, too many hours of keeping Marines safe from non-existent threats. And that was the point. Practicing the square over and over again, flying training missions, and getting to know the craft as an extension of yourself meant you didn't have to pay attention to the minor details. Your body and subconscious knew what to do. All a pilot had to do was pay close enough attention to handle new situations. Like this one. Talby spotted a herd hovering over Mira's far aft deck plates. He zoomed in and groaned. A few dozen pine cones, varying in size and length, flew slowly and silently through space. They were headed toward S&R Black and his two Marines. Talby to Copenhagen.
Aye, sir. Go.
There's a group of pine cones headed this way, coming from aft. He ran a quick calculation based on their current speed. They're moving pretty slow. You should have 2 minutes before they're in my firing range, 3 before they're on you. When she spoke, her voice didn't have a trace of fear.
Aye, sir. Stay and fight or board Black?
Good question. If I can't warn them off with some shots, I want you to wait for my signal and get your asses back on the ship. Understood?
Aye, sir.
Copenhaver said.
Murdoch, got it? Got it.
Murdoch said. Talby smiled. They were both privates, but Murdoch had already conceded decisions to Copenhaver. She was a natural-born leader. At least Talby thought so. He'd have a conversation with Gunny about her future when they got back to Trident Station. Talby to Dunn.
Done here. We have your telemetry. Black counts 40-plus pine cones.
Aye, sir. I can intercept them long before they become a threat to the ship.
Yes, you can.
Dunn paused.
Black suggests using regular flechette rounds to give them a scare. If they don't break off their trajectory, it'll be time to use the heavy stuff.
Aye, sir, Talby said. His lips twitched into a faint smile. Black have any suggestions on the heavy stuff? Dunn's voice held a smile.
Tritium rounds first. I don't want you firing those missiles unless it's absolutely necessary.
Understood, sir, Talby said.
Done out.
Acknowledged, Talby said. He veered off his patrol square and floated over S&R Black's spine toward her aft. From an altitude of 20 meters, he could see the pits and blemishes from the flechette rounds he'd fired during the first starfish attack. When they got the ship back to Trident, she'd need some TLC. If she makes it back, he thought. He kept his thrust fairly low, not wanting to stray too far from the ship and his two Marines. The herd was less than a minute out of range. He'd stopped the craft a good 15 seconds before they reached the kill zone and began thrusting backward. That would give his forward flechette launchers the best chance of disrupting the herd. The SV-52 was loaded to the gills with ammo. Regular flechettes, the tritium flechettes, and two of those special warheads, whatever the hell they were. Like the captain said, he'd only used the warheads as a last resort. They didn't have a good idea of what the damn things would do, and he sure as hell didn't want to be around when they went off. He especially didn't want his Marines anywhere near the explosions. Unfortunately, if the regular and tritium rounds didn't work, he might have less than a few seconds to fire the missiles before the detonation would put his Marines in certain danger. That was his real concern. 20 seconds. A window on his HUD zoomed in on the herd, the cam view slowly panning to cover their approach. Without magnification, the creatures were little more than a tight, irregularly shaped blob of black, darker than the hull itself. He waited, his fingers wrapped around the throttle and the triggers for the guns. Just walk a line of fire through the middle, he thought, and then see what they do. His eyes widened. A portion of deck plate in front of the herd vibrated. Pieces of metal debris flew off the hull and into space. The herd broke apart, most of the creatures turning in space to retreat. For some, however, it was too late. The deck plate shattered as a starfish pulled itself through the hull, shooting its acid at the stragglers. The creature pulled its arms in before extending them like a flower blooming in a nanosecond. The strange life form jetted forward and turned its body to face its prey. Talby watched in fascination as the starfish vomited streams of acid in the ZG, the deadly liquid flying through the vacuum like missiles toward their targets. Several herd members, too slow to flee, tumbled from the force of the liquid streams striking their bodies. Talby zoomed in on the closest pine cone to the starfish. Its body, normally black and barely more than an outline in normal conditions, glowed green for an instant. The starfish waved its arms again and flew close enough to grasp the creature in one of its many arms. Another pine cone tried to distance itself from the predator, but the attacker easily plucked it with another limb. The starfish thing dragged them into its center, another set of arms prying and clutching at its prey. The pinecone shell split open, revealing glowing gray flesh. The morsel disappeared into the starfish's maw for a moment before the now empty husk was jettisoned like a cannon shot. The starfish did the same with the remaining captured pinecone. With another sweep of its arms, the starfish followed the fleeing herd, slowly gaining on them. Talby lost sight of the pine cones as they flew past the edge of the hull and into space. The starfish, undeterred, gained speed and disappeared. For a moment, Talby did nothing but breathe. He was still trying to process what he'd seen when he realized his jaw had dropped. He closed it with a click of teeth and activated the comms. Black, did you see that?
Yes, Lieutenant,
the AI said. How the hell are they moving like that?
Unknown.
Black said.
Again, if I had a creature to study, I might begin to understand them.
Talby shook his head. Captain, we had some visitors, but they seem to have departed,
Acknowledged.
Dunn said.
I saw the feed. That thing just pushed itself out of the deck plates?
Aye, sir. Metal debris still pushing outward into space. Might be a hazard if we have to fly that way. The comms went silent for a moment, as if Dunn didn't know what to say. The space of 2 breaths passed before he finally heard the captain say,
Maintain patrol, Talby. I don't want one of those things coming out next to the spindle and our Marines.
Talby nodded to himself. Aye, sir. My thoughts exactly. Talby out. He turned the SV-52 until it once again faced S&R Black. A quick nudge of the throttle and the support craft gained speed. He hadn't flown far from his charges, but every second it took to return had his stomach churning. He'd have to be more observant now. Migrating pine cones and hovering starfish were still a threat, certainly, but the idea of one of those things simply smashing through the deck plates? His Marines could be instantly dragged beneath Mira's crumbling superstructure, or simply eaten by the starfish things. He shuddered, his fingers twitching near the cannon's trigger. Poke an arm out, you fuckers, he said aloud. The bravado sounded weak and without conviction to his own ears.